Good evening to everyone and welcome to our debate entitled The Politics of Expertise tonight. First, I would like to thank again the Institut Français, its director Bertrand Buchwalter and Florence Ferrand, who has been the kingpin of this promising night of ideas and of our meeting this evening, for entrusting me with the coordination of this debate, and to all of you in person and online speakers and audience, of course, here. Thank you for being with us. So first of all, I would like to introduce you to the poet and writer Anthony Anaxagoru, that you've already met minutes ago, and who will make a short performance of his own poetry inspired by the topic of our debate tonight. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Thank you. Yes, I'm going to read a very short poem that I think about, or that I wrote around the idea of the politics of expertise. All right. On this day, the professor discovered tomorrow's map. He put his best findings in a cup, passed them along to another man with small feet who said no. The professor heard the news and walked for miles until he stumbled on a brand new rock. There he took a mallet and shattered the shell. The exterior erupted like a flock of bad birds all through the valley, down into the sleeping hamlet. Bits of broken stone completed the ground. Children collected remnants. One girl called her peace truth. Another boy claimed his peace fact. And like this, the children grew into war. They kept their pieces of rock close to their hearts, running at each other with lies, misinformation, and agendas until the yellow spun. They run until their feet were the size of fists. And like this, the children were no longer their age. They understood the temperature of power, the physics of control. They knew what it meant to carry a body all the way down to its hole, interred, governed by more rocks and stones. The professor, older now, and close to the last of his writings, took his work out into the yard. There, he screamed into the face of an empty rose, the hard eyes of a fence. He pulled at the roots until the entire lawn was igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. Just before he went back inside, he stopped, and all around he could hear the happy laughter of children. Thanks.
Thank you, Anthony, for these very inspiring words, and we'll try to be not so easy to take over. Okay, so the main issue of our debate tonight is, of course, deeply embedded in the current event of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also has an obvious historicity because it has arisen in modern societies for centuries. Each time the political decision has been led to consider knowledge built by scientists, whether it be economists or medical doctors or climatologists. And in face of the political difficulty to cope with various crises, scientists were often praised as the ones who should be the real decision makers. But isn't political decision making precisely what exceeds the mere sum of all expertise? So to shed light and give their insights on such a crucial and topical issue, I am pleased to welcome tonight 3 speakers, which come from various fields of scientific expertise, and I would like to briefly introduce them to you. So maybe we'll begin with our online speaker. Is the technical thing okay? Great. Hello, good evening. So our first speaker tonight, who is far away from London, but though with us, is Dr. Renate Crist, who is now an independent climate change and environmental services expert. Renate was trained as a biologist and earth sciences specialist, and she has served, among other duties, as a national expert in the European Commission, where she actively participated in the negotiation of the Kyoto Protocol. And eventually, Renate held for a decade the function of the Secretary of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in Geneva. So good evening, Renate. Our second speaker with us in London tonight is Professor Bashir Al-Hashimi. Good evening. Professor Alashimi is Arm Professor of Computer Engineering and Executive Dean of the Faculty of Natural, Mathematical and Engineering Sciences at King's College London. He is internationally acknowledged for his work on energy efficient computing and systems engineering. He founded the RMECS Industry Academia Center of Research Excellence. Professor Alashimi received the IET Faraday Medal in 2020 and is Commander of the British Empire for Services to Engineering and Industry. And finally, our third speaker tonight is Professor Marcus du Sotois, who is Professor of Mathematics at the University of Oxford, where he holds the prestigious Simony Chair for the Public Understanding of Science and is a Fellow of New College. Marcus was awarded Officer of the British Empire for Services to Science in 2010 and a Fellow of the Royal Society in 2016, among many other awards and prizes. Particularly involved in communicating science to the public, Marcus regularly writes for various British and international media, and The Guardian has described him as the, quote, de facto public face of math. So to all of you, thanks again for being here to share your views with the audience here. And though it is the night of ideas, we don't have all night ahead of us to share ideas, I'm afraid. So we're going to strictly keep to our schedule. And being a historian myself, I assume I am expected to have some expertise on time. So I will be carefully keeping the clock. So sorry if I might maybe interrupt you sometime, but I hope I will not have to do that. So to begin our discussion, I would like to ask each of you to deliver a short introductory speech. We'll then have a general discussion, and before the audience will be welcome to ask some questions to our speakers. So three of you are undisputed experts in your respective fields, and yet you all have, to varying extents, sought to put your knowledge at the service of the community and to participate in the construction of public policies that require the expertise of scholars. So could you please enlighten this process and choice for us? And maybe we'll begin with Marcus. The floor is yours.
Great. Well, it's lovely to be here. And I suppose with the most French surname of all the panel, I perhaps should be speaking in French, but my French isn't very, I'm not an expert in French, unfortunately. So I always think it's slightly, I always get slightly embarrassed by the introduction because, you know, I have these grand titles, okay, Professor of Maths, but this incredibly grand title of the Professor for the Public Understanding of Science. I think when I interact with the media or the public, I think that people think I must be an absolute expert in all of science. And I had to learn very quickly that to be humble, actually, about what I don't know. I remember a journalist phoning me up about the award for the Nobel Prize in Medicine for the award for the discovery of telomeres. And this journalist from the Daily Telegraph said, could you explain to me, Professor, what a telomere is? Biology has always been my very weak point. So I'm afraid I actually pulled up the Wikipedia page and said, well, it's the bit at the end of the DNA which controls how long the cell lasts and things. But it was at that point that I realized it's very important, actually, as an expert, to realize where your boundaries are. But I think this role that I have, the Professor for the Public Understanding of Science, is quite an interesting one in respect of the role of experts in relationship to society. It was a job that was originally created for Richard Dawkins in 1995. And actually, that was a very kind of early idea for such a professorship. And actually, it's rather an old school idea. The Professor for the Public Understanding of Science is the idea that I have all the knowledge and I'm giving it to the public to then deal with. And I think there are many more professorships like this which have developed, which are sort of trying to bridge the kind of between science and society. And they're generally called now things like Professor for Science and Society, rather than the sort of one-way, rather top-down title that I have. But I think these roles have become more and more important. There was a real crisis around 2000 where there was so much scientific development happening. The pace was so much, but nobody was telling the public about it. And it kind of led to a lot of distrust in what scientists were doing. And there was a House of Lords report, the Jenkins report, that actually criticized scientists for really not stepping up to the plate. We just didn't think it was our responsibility. We just hid away in our labs kind of doing our work, and somebody else does that job. So I think that this role that was created by Charles Simonyi in 1995, and now the many more of them, is incredibly important, because in a way science is like a superpower with massive impact on the rest of society. And these kind of professorships that, you know, I do my research in mathematics, but half my role is trying to empower the public to try and make decisions about the science that we're producing. And I think this is important because, of course, expertise is really important to try and understand what's happening, but it's not all. So I wouldn't suggest that you hand over the reins of government to scientists to run things, because that's only one component of a decision-making process. And I think that's really important. Again, it's sort of important to understand one's boundaries. And I think actually I went to an anatomy department in Louisville to talk to some people that were interested in brains that were kind of super intelligent scientific brains. And there was kind of an interesting thing that was revealed from that, and actually relates to, people might know a little essay that Isaiah Berlin once wrote, which relates to the Greek idea of different thinkers, that there are foxes and hedgehogs. The hedgehog knows one thing very deeply, whilst the fox knows many things, but in a more shallow way. And it seems that brains as well have that different quality to them. And a lot of scientific brains have this kind of hedgehog quality of being lots of local neuronal activity, very focused. And then there are the kind of out of the box thinkers with more kind of synapses, neurons across the brain, connecting different areas. And I asked the person in the anatomy department, well, surely the best brain would be the one that actually has both of these, you know, incredible local connections, expertise, and that ability to think globally. And the professor there said, actually, it's impossible to create a brain like that. The capacity of the human mind is such you can't actually fit both of those types of brains into the skull, and we have to have either one or the other. And it led me to realize, of course, yeah, that's how we must work in society, that yeah, we have the hedgehogs, the ones with expertise, but they will be experts in one particular area. And what we need to look at is trying to create that network so that we can have the foxes and the hedgehogs working together in order to be able to make the decisions that we're faced with. So that was kind of, you know, experts are very important, but you've got to complement those with perhaps those who have the broader kind of view of the world, that we need both the experts and the generalists, the foxes and the hedgehogs.
Thank you very much. Bashir, would you follow on this, please?
Sure. Delighted to be here. I've always wanted to be an engineer from the early days. In the early 90s, I had the opportunity to, after I finished my PhD, to start to think about what will be electronics devices of the future looks like. I knew that engineers do things that brings joy to people, makes life better for people, save lives. But in the early 90s, it was very much about the future is going to be mobile. People are going to go around carrying their devices, talking to people, making phone calls, doing things perhaps what we have read about in science fictions. So I spent the last 30 years developing silicon chips that goes into digital devices, which are really the brains of the digital devices. Some of my early ideas, some of my research findings has shaped and influenced what's in mobile phones. I did not set out really to design a mobile phone. What I set out to do is to understand what would be needed from an engineering point of view to build such a device. And I think now we got to the stage where we take tech or technology for granted. What I would like to see going forward is very much tech for good. Tech that is in the service of society. Tech that is protect the planet. Because in the early 90s, we did not really think about the planet. What we thought about is, can we build these devices? If I were to ask you, could you do without your tech? The answer will be, well, I'm not sure. So it is very likely that tech will continue. But the question is, can we design it so that it will benefit us, but also protect us? My belief that the tech of the future will converge the natural intelligence with the artificial intelligence. The implications of that is very much that the decisions making will be blurred. Who will take responsibility for that? If something goes wrong, is it the machine? Is it the person who designed the machines? Is it the person perhaps who hacked the machine? So the blurring the boundaries between artificial intelligence and natural intelligence, which really is leading to the smart machines people are referring to, creates a new set of policies, or at least the need for a new set of policies that we don't even thought about yet. Are they inclusive enough? Are they diverse enough? Are they ethical? I also want to briefly cover the issue about how do we make sure that what we do in tech does not damage the planet. In 2021, over 250 million AirPods have been sold. Every piece of electronics has got a battery. So if we were just to carry on producing this technology, how are we going to make sure that the natural resources we use does not get depleted to the stage where there will be little or nothing left for future generations to come? I think scientists, our engineers, are drawn to these professions because of the unknown. But there is a need also for scientists and engineers to understand the context in which the technology they produce is going to be used. They need to provide advice for decision makers, but I also believe that they need to be involved in the decision making, but without being the sole decision maker. I also think the future technology will blur the physical world and the virtual world. And the implication of this is it will be at the heart of the fabric of society. Because I think most of us would know what a physical world is. That is a physical world. A virtual world is something which we interact with, but we don't live in it. And the future technologies will actually take us from the physical world to the virtual world. And the term for that is the metaverse, which we've already started to see that. So you could imagine that a social media combined with video gaming, it will create that metaphors. So I could be sitting in front of a computer wearing a headset with lots and lots of gadgets and actually creating a character inside a computer that will mimic myself. It will mimic my expressions. It might even mimic my emotions. That blurring between between the physical world and the virtual world, it really is scary. But it doesn't mean without the right policies, we will not be able to benefit from both. So I will leave you with the thought, if we were to develop that technology, one need to ask, what is a human being definition be like? Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I ask Renate, is the technology working on this? Yes, great.
Yes.
Hi, Renate. Please, the floor is yours if you want to say something about your itinerary and the way you've been through all of this process and choice about putting expertise with decision making. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted about being invited to this event, and I'm very, very sorry that I cannot join you in person, but I try my best. I come from an organization which was sometimes labeled as like a social innovation for science policy interface informed decision-making. So what is the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and why was it established? It was during the 80s where we were almost faced a little bit like it's the beginning of the pandemic with questions. Is climate change, humans changing the climate? Is it dangerous? Do we need coordinated international action? And that was in fact when the United Nations General Assembly asked for a report to be able to take a decision whether a convention was needed or not. And in fact, it took after the first IPCC report the decision a global climate convention is necessary. So the basis of IPCC was really that governments asked for scientific expertise. So what are the features which make IPCC reports still what some people call the gold standard? Its work is guided by a few simple but key principles. Its work is open, objective, comprehensive, and transparent. So that means experts from all countries are invited to contribute. Scientific literature from all schools of thought and relevant disciplines are considered. A two-stage review ensures broad and unbiased assessment, and we have tens of thousands of comments really which are considered by the authors and make it broad and comprehensive. And reports, that's also very important, are not limited to natural science and climatology and technical fixes, but it evolved over time to really address more the human, the social, the ethical dimensions. And another important feature of IPCC reports is the careful assessment of uncertainties, which is very important for risk management. IPCC is also kind of a peculiar construction. It's an intergovernmental body, as the name says, but the work is carried out by independent scientists. So that requires also clear rules of interaction. At the beginning, I would say the governments ask the policy relevant questions, then the scientists go away, do the assessment, and at the end of the process, governments come back and approve the report. So it's a very good division of labor, but still questions might come up, like that leads me to a delicate aspect. It's the balance between being policy relevant and avoiding to be policy prescriptive, between scientific facts and value judgments. And let me just give you an example from the climate science. The ultimate objective of the Climate Convention is to prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. But what is dangerous? And for whom? Is it the few centimeters of sea level rise which will submerge your home? Or is it the repeated flash flood which washes away the infrastructure, or the additional drought killing all your livestock once again? While in other regions, people live in comfortable houses and worry that greenhouse gas emission reduction might kind of affects their lifestyle. So it really depends where you are and how you are affected by the impacts of climate change. And IPCC was repeatedly asked, so what level is safe, what is dangerous? Is it 2 degrees warming or is it 1.5 degrees warming? IPCC did not say that's safe or that's dangerous, but it showed the implications of various options of future development and what difference half a degree would make, for instance, for ecosystems and humans. And the facts are undisputable. Limiting warming to 1.5 degrees reduces risks considerably. But IPCC also made clear to achieve this goal, global CO2 emissions have to reach net zero, and zero is zero by mid-century. So this is really a challenge, and that requires tough political decisions at the international level, at the national level. So that's where scientists can provide the necessary information, but they cannot take the decision. But so you may ask, why despite 30 years of IPCC assessment, so little has happened in climate policy? Well, we don't have, like in medicine, the double-blind studies where we can study what would have happened if we would not have had IPCC. But what we really could observe is huge investment in clean technology, in climate-friendly infrastructure, and increasingly a direct reflection of the scientific findings in international documents like the Paris Agreement, or most recently in Glasgow, where the 1.5-degree target was reaffirmed by governments. So I still believe IPCC is a successful model, but there's always a need to evolve, to adapt to changing conditions like new media, to enhance interaction with interested public, to address the most burning question: how shall we live together in the future? So to conclude, I would tell to decision makers, ask scientists to collectively provide answers, be a bit patient and let them do their work independently without interference, discuss the results to make sure you really understand the consequences, and discuss the results also with stakeholders and public. But don't ask scientists to take political decisions and make value judgments.
Thank you very much, but don't conclude. Yes, we still have a lot of time to chat together. Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for sharing your own experience as scientists involved into policymaking at various scales. So we have relevance and transparency, technology and human beings, foxes and hedgehogs. So maybe from this first overview, I would like to launch the debate on the relation between science and democracy, which I think is at the core of the politics of expertise. So to a certain extent, by letting the expert make political decision, the politicians fade away. And we all know that politicians don't like to be faded away. So the experts provide an integrated decision that is something like a solution to a current problem. But political decisions are also based on choices, whether interweaving of social, human, moral consideration that are not necessarily science-based. Thus, as a paradox, entrusting government to experts in order to take the most rational, efficient decisions, doesn't it mean, to a certain extent, putting aside the democratic process? And how can we balance this? In other words, is technocracy not a challenge to democracy, especially since experts, unlike politicians, are not politically accountable to the people? So who would like to draw on this for Marcus?
Oh, yes. There's an interesting moment when Francis Galton was very dismissive of the public being able to make any decisions and was very down on democracy and said, you really got to leave this to the experts. And he ran a little experiment to kind of prove this. He went to a country fair and asked everyone to guess the weight of a cow, and most people had no knowledge at all. He was rather shocked when he took the average of this guess that it was very, very close to the actual value. And he actually changed his mind about the power of the crowd to actually be wise, and it gave rise to this expression, the wisdom of the crowd. And I think it's very interesting to sort of understand that sometimes the crowd is very wise. There are sometimes when you don't want the crowd to make decisions. I mean, if I'm in an airplane, I really do not want it to be flown in a collective way by the passengers. I want an expert to fly that airplane. But for me, I've been quite interested recently in, what sort of questions is the public very wise at if they're given the tools, the information to actually make those decisions. And one very interesting example recently is sort of the idea of participatory budgeting. The idea that you actually allow the public to get involved in the way that a budget will be decided. And again, it's very interesting because this has succeeded in some places and failed in others. It's failed in Iceland when they asked people to volunteer from the public. Now, anyone who's going to volunteer has got a vested interest in something and isn't really the crowd. And where it succeeded, I think it was in Canada, where they actually wrote letters to people, and you had to, like doing jury service, had to step up and take part. There was no option. Then actually it was a very powerful tool in making decisions, economic decisions. So I think that the key here is, first of all, understanding what are the things where it's the democracy will be very powerful. What does democracy need in order to be able to become kind of wise? So that's partly kind of our role in actually bringing sort of very complex ideas. I'm very into publishing open data and things, but actually it's very hard to interpret data for somebody who's not numerate, data literate. And that's the role, how do we actually tell the story that's hiding behind a lot of this things which require a very complex language to understand. And that's, a really important role. That's why I sort of feel these professorships, they're like ambassadors for this kind of superpower, which we speak a very strange language and we need to help people. But yeah, so I think actually the interesting thing is the crowd can be wise.
Bashir, would you draw on?
Yeah, I think, do I want to be part of a decision that has implications? Well, it all depends on what my role is. If I have been elected to make policies and decisions that will benefit me, then I need to be well informed, and I will seek sound advice from every corner that will allow me to do that. I think future technologies depends heavily on data. And this is our data. This is what's being called citizen data. So by the virtue of that, we need to be part of it. The question is how? And I don't know the answer. But what I'm highlighting is, it should not be left for others to decide on something which we are involved in through the data we make, through the data we provide. There's something parallel to citizen data, is citizen science. Again, it's based on data. I provide my data for scientists and engineers to do something with them in order to create new technologies. The public have the options to be involved. The more involved you are, the better informed you are. So I think if we raise awareness of citizen data and citizen science, I think there will be a lot more involvement from citizens, but that does not necessarily mean all the citizens. There will be a subset who are interested in this and they will add value. The scientists and engineers who their love and passions is to do science and engineering, and those we have elected, and those who advise those we have elected should also be involved. So to me, really, it is, let's identify all the actors that would lead us to an informed decisions. And the better we are informed about identification of the actors, I think the more inclusive policy and decision we'll make.
Thank you. Renate, would you add something, please, on this issue?
Yes, I would like to add a few thoughts about climate justice and intra and intergenerational responsibility, common but differentiated responsibility. Like when you would ask a pure scientist to say, okay, what is the overall responsibility of a certain country for global warming? One might go back in history and say, okay, the historic responsibility and the contribution to warming is so and so much. And so that's why in the light of your responsibility, you would have to reduce emissions by that and that percentage within the next 2 or 3 years. But on the other hand, the problem was really, publicly known only since the 1970s, 1980s. So what is, how can we really put the historic responsibility about the current, on the current generation? On the other hand, it's, if we continue our lifestyle like that, it will have implications for the future generations. So it's a very delicate balance, I would say, this climate justice and intergenerational justice. And on the other hand, we have, like the scientific or science tell us, we have for each temperature goal, we have a limited carbon budget, and how to share out this carbon budget between countries based on their past or current responsibility. So it's science can provide the data and can provide certain options, but it's in particular in a problem like the climate change problem, because greenhouse gases don't recognize any borders. So it's really, yeah, I would say science can underpin and can help international diplomacy, and climate conferences can help in that respect, establishing a dialogue. But yeah, it's the end, as I said earlier, it's a value judgment where science can assist and can underpin the decisions. We have also seen recently, because the previous speaker talked about citizen science, and we have established like citizen councils to solve the climate problem. And I think it's a very interesting experiment and a step forward, but it's the end also, like when the citizen councils then say, well, okay, we don't mind about the implications of climate change in different regions or so. It has to be, again, a political decision and a value judgment to say, no, we face our common responsibility in solidarity with those countries and people who are heavily impacted by the risks of climate change.
Yeah. Well, science can help, definitely, but we also know that we are in an era where the public confidence and trust in science is also undermined by many social actors, including sometimes political actors themselves, what is sometimes called like a post-truth era, in which some people are more likely to accept an argument based on their emotions and beliefs rather than on one based on scientific facts. So this is all the more true as people draw on the notion of doubt, which is at the root of the scientific process itself. The scientific knowledge is something which is always on the move and always being built up. So what can scientists do with this, actually?
I think there's one way that we seem to have to go forward from quite a lot of research that's been done in kind of nature and things, is that we have to act in a very unscientific way, which is, why do people sort of believe these stories? Very often because there is a story, you know, when it came to vaccines, for example, MMR, it just requires one story by somebody who claims that their child has developed autism because, you know, just after that. And it seems to be, actually, there's a nice quote in George Monbiot's book, Out of the Wreckage, which says you can only replace one story with another story. You see, as a scientist, our reaction would be, okay, well, I'm going to show you all the data, all the numbers, the vaccines and things like that. And it just does not change the mind. And I think that we scientists have to learn some tricks that are very anti-scientific, which is, yeah, I would tell that data story, but I would combine it actually with a very unscientific story, which is an example that will actually move the person to realize, well, yes, but what about this kid who got measles and the effect that that had? And that is very unscientific. And but you know, there have been papers in Nature showing that this is a very powerful way. And it is, you know, again, that one has to understand that people have particular stances on kind of issues of the day in order to bond with a particular group. And that's very important. And we need to understand how that sort of, that I'm only having this opinion because my friends or because my family have these opinions, and how to cope with kind of infiltrating that kind of, you know, so it isn't good enough to just stick in our group. It's about empathy and understanding, which sometimes we scientists are not the best at, about why did you get there? What is your journey to there, and how can we take you back? So I think it's kind of curious that we might have to use rather unscientific methods in order to be able to counter the kind of the false news that's out there.
So non-science to sports science, interesting. Bashir, would you?
Yeah, I think. What do we mean by trust? I think we trust doctors without us really knowing how they got trained, what experience they have, but we trust them. And we have the expressions, trust me, I'm a doctor. I think we really do need to move to trust me, I'm a scientist. But how do we do that? We have different types of scientists. We have the computer scientists, we have mathematicians, we have chemists, we have physicists, we have biologists, we have social scientists, we have geographers. The way to gain trust in the context of science, we really need to understand people, relationship to technologies. That is the key to it. And that requires humanities, that requires social scientists. So over the last couple of years, as a computer engineer, I started to read a lot more about social science, about social policies, about public policies. Public policy is a core discipline in social science. The word science policy, it is not something scientists sort of feel proud to say, because it's not seen as a hardcore science, which what computer scientists, mathematicians, physicists, chemists, the majority of them wants to do. So I think to me is understanding that relationship between people and technologies that will give confidence to those, the citizens and the societies, that scientists are working together to understand both aspects of it. It's not just the science, but also how people think, how people behave, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And that is also the essence of what a good public policy is, what a good decisions is going forward, is understanding that relationship between humans, behaviors and cultures, and the science, the core science, physical, mathematical, biologists too.
Thank you very much. Renate, would you add something on this, please?
Yeah, just a little bit. It was just mentioned earlier that scientists should work together, and I think one of the kind of key features of IPCC, and also why scientists and experts from all disciplines really want to be participating in IPCC assessment work, is this interdisciplinary exchange of views and this interdisciplinarity of the work. And I think that's really one of the very important messages, to say we can't only focus on natural science and but have to look at the social and human interaction. And I think also an agreed body of knowledge like the IPCC reports can be a great help of, for instance, talking against or arguing against fake news and, I mean, conveying a certain message. And that's also why I think, for instance, Fridays for Future say, listen to science, and they always refer basically to our reports. But I also would like to make the point about media, because sometimes I feel an imbalance when we say, let's say, more than 90% of scientists agree about climate change, and then you have debates where we have one from one side and one from the other side, but that's not the balance when you have 90 or more than 90 to just a few percent, 2 or 3%, and then you have in the public debate one arguing against the other one and giving then, I would say, fake news or unbalanced information, a little bit too much, I mean, too much profile and too much visibility. And I think here also scientists have to be much courageous and speak out and not shy away to also address fake news and wrong information directly. I think sometimes scientists, in particular also natural scientists, are kind of too polite to say that bluntly.
Thank you. So let's not be polite. Okay, thank you again. It's time now to open the debate to the audience. So anyone keen to ask a question to our speakers, you're very welcome. Please be sure to ask quite short questions, so we have time for 2, maybe 3 questions to our speakers tonight. Please, maybe there's a mic. Yes, mic coming. Thank you. So please, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your contribution. One quick question. Where did science go wrong, in the sense of, science has done all those wonders for us around us, modern life, everything. Yet, despite all, there's a number of people doing your job, Professor, trying to mediate and explain science more than ever. Yet, it's very clear the public is, in doubt, right? We have this pandemic, the solution is science, yet it has never been out. So if you go back and try to introspect, where did it go wrong?
I think the Jenkins report that I mentioned highlighted one of the factors, which was exactly as Renate said, that scientists just weren't stepping up to the plate and believing it was their role to try and sort of create a climate of dialogue that the public could take part in, and therefore the public got very suspicious of things like genetically modified crops, for example. And I think places like the Royal Society here in the UK have done a lot of good work in trying to look forward to what will be the issues that will come up in the next 10 years. I mean, I was on a committee that was looking at the impact that machine learning and AI will have. And the idea is, if you actually engage the public in the debate early on, when we started, it was a very small percentage that even knew what machine learning was. But by the time we'd finished the report, first of all, that was a report that then could be used, as Renate said, to, you want these reports such that a politician can go and just look at what is the evidence. But I think it also helped to just involve people in the debate. They felt sort of empowered by being asked, well, what do you think if this is the future? So I think we're in a better place than we were, say, when that Jenkins report came out in 2000, when I really think there was a crisis in the fact that there was just that was when probably distrust in scientists was at its greatest, because they just was scared and didn't understand. I mean, I think there's an important point here as well, which is I still think there is a lot of trust in scientists, provided they feel they're independent. And that, I think, is an important issue which is coming up. Is this person actually employed by Uber, actually, as a machine learner? Principally, their salary is, but they have like a one day in Oxford. I mean, I don't trust necessarily somebody who's being funded by Uber in machine learning as much as I would somebody who's just within us. That said, I want collaboration between all of these. I don't want to be just ivory towers and corporate and government and policies is separate. But I think that's an important issue. Just understanding, well, where is your money coming from?
Whether it is science has gone wrong or science being misrepresented, it really is the same thing. At the end of the day, is we need to do better. I think it's the complexity of what we are dealing with. The scale at which these problems we are addressing, it means are really too difficult for the general, for member of the public to understand. But on the other hand, they're not inclined to understand it. So I think, at least from my own experience, I think is as an engineer, I need to learn different skills in what I want to communicate and to whom, without being seen that just because I'm changing the way I communicate, I am dumbing down the message. And I think this is something requires change of culture in academia, where it is okay to talk to non-experts without being seen that you are no longer what we've been referred to, and I think Marx will agree, a top-notch professor, right? I feel very, very comfortable in communicating a topic depending on who I'm communicating with. But that also requires me to learn a lot more from the other side. And perhaps not many scientists and engineers are willing to do that because they're so much preoccupied with the complexity of the problem they're dealing with. So as I said, is it wrong? Have we gone wrong? Have we been represented? I think it's a bit of both. And I think what we cannot afford is to continue with that. We need to reset it and address it from the beginning, knowing that it is no longer just my science matter, trust me, I'm a scientist. It is trust me because there is sound evidence behind it. And that evidence did not come sort of an afterthought. So let's start with the journey from the beginning. right? And that is really the change of culture. So the type of graduates I would like to see is very much that who feel confident in knowing about social science, just as much as about computer science. And then the challenge is, how do you design a curriculum that will allow graduates, one, to be interested in both, and two, to find enough time to graduate them.
Thank you. Renate, please. Would you add something on
Yeah,
this?
just maybe one remark from the climate change context again. Of course, I agree there might be something wrong, gone something wrong in the terms of science communication and how the problems are being explained. But I believe it's not that something has gone wrong in science, but how the climate problem has advanced. It's simply the consequences of how much the emissions have to be reduced, and the consequent, the decisions that have to be taken are now really so serious and so dramatic that people maybe are not willing to face it. Let's say if we would have acted earlier and listened to the warning of the scientists, we would have to reduce emissions by several percent, but now it's 40%, it's 50% within the next 10, 20 years. So that's dramatic changes in our economy and to the lifestyle. And I think this is the sheer challenge, or the magnitude of the problem. I think that's where people then try to close their eyes.
Thank you very much. I think we might have 2 or 3 minutes left for one more question. Short question with short answers, please. I'm sorry. Mina?
Merci. You mentioned the question of the culture, the difference in the culture to build the trust. How do you imagine to make the culture from the scientists, which is on the long term or midterm, with no yes and no answers? It's usually the doubt is very important. And the politician needs to have yes or no response on a very short time. So how do you imagine we can improve that?
I think you need time and you need willingness from all involved. And the willingness may come from incentives. So willingness may come from incentives. And the sooner we start in building the relationships, the better. So I think we will not be able to create a culture overnight, given the legacy we have, and also given the complexity of the issues we're dealing with. And I think we, as I said, we really do need to, the sooner we start, and that start could be now, as we are doing it right now. I think schools need to take this issue as well. Colleges need to take that issue. Universities need to take that issue. Government need to take that issue. So we all have a part to play. And the biggest challenge to us is to work out what is really my part in building this culture and building this relationship.
Thank you. Renate, would you add something quite short on this time issue?
Maybe just one additional remark. I think scientists should also be more solution-oriented, not only explaining the problem, the climate problem, but really show options, how to solve it and what would be the consequences of different options. So be solution-oriented also.
Thank you. Marcus, would you have some concluding words before we finish?
I think the point that Bashir made is very important. It actually takes time to become an expert, and I'm very cautious of my graduate students in when they start the moment of trying to engage with the public, because you must not sacrifice becoming an expert. And as I said at the beginning, it's very hard to be both a hedgehog and a fox at the same time. And the best thing is to create dialogue and collaboration in order to solve those problems, not expect just one person to do everything.
Thank you very much. I see that we've I fear actually that we've come to an end with this fascinating debate. Thank you very, very much to the three of you. And again, thank you to the audience also. I'm very sorry for the question could not be raised, but sorry. So thank you to all and enjoy the rest of your evening.